Welcome, everyone, from RAS China. My name is Julie Chen. I am the art focus convener of the Royal Asiatic Society China. I've been serving in this position since 2013. I currently teach at various university institutions in China through the global program. I teach Chinese art history. I am so excited to be presenting the Zoom session because for those of you who have heard the news, we are all under lockdown. And I cannot take my art focus group into the museums where we have been studying collections and hearing from experts, whether they are directors or curators or artists. But thanks to this wonderful technology that we have, I am able to bring you speakers from museums all over the world. So we are going to embark on this journey while we are under this lockdown. A couple of housekeeping rules. If you could please mute yourself so that we don't have any distracting noise, that would be great. You're welcome to keep your camera on. It's nice to see your face since I haven't seen many of you for almost 2 months now. We have Irina, who is our admin under RAS booking, without whose assistance I cannot do a lot of the, cannot deal with the tech issues. She will be letting you in. She will be signing you in. So please use the same name that you registered so that we can keep track of the invitees, and it's for our internal records. Please feel free to type in your questions into the chat box. I am locked up in an apartment with a lot of people, which means I don't have the most reliable Wi-Fi. My Wi-Fi tends to drop me off at sometimes the most pivotal moment, which is why I have my backup here. We have Paul Lin, who I have had the honor of meeting when I was delivering lectures at the British Consulate's lunchtime series to our speaker. But I'd like to introduce Paul first. Paul Lin is the founder and CEO of No Plus, a leading streaming platform where users can learn from the world's best masters in their fields. He graduated from the University of Oxford and works as the General Secretary of Oxford and Cambridge University's Alumni Network. Previously, he worked at the British Council as Communication Officer, building connections, understanding, and trust between people through arts and culture, education, and language. And if and when I drop off, and even if I don't, Paul will serve as my co-host for the Q&A. So without further ado, I am so honored and so pleased to bring a phenomenal speaker to all the members of the Royal Asiatic Society. For those of you, you may already know him already. He's quite famous, and I've gone through his YouTube lectures. They're quite addictive. Nicholas Chrimes, who we endearingly call Nick, is an historian and best-selling author of Cambridge, Treasure Island in the Fens, an account of the history of Cambridge University. Currently an instructor at No Plus app, Nicholas lectures at the Moeller and Judge Institutes of Cambridge University on art, architecture, and cross-cultural links with China. Prior to the lockdown, Nick's been to China multiple times, and currently he lectures for several universities through the online platform. Nick's in-depth knowledge of Western art and history is reached through his study of economics and politics at Bristol University, complemented by postgraduate training in Renaissance art in Florence, Italy, along with an MBA at Insead Fontainebleau, France. Not only does he have this illustrious academic background, Nicholas resides for 35 years in an ancient house within the deep countryside near Cambridge with his wife, 4 children, and many animals. In both directions he has witnessed both in the East and the West. It is his hope to inspire others in appreciating arts and histories of different cultures and the deep links between culture and life. So,
okay. Yep, you're dropping out a bit, Julie. But
thank you for joining us. And with that, I turn over to you.
Okay, thank you. You dropped out a bit, Julie, but thank you for that generous, if over-generous, introduction. And to kind of humanize you, Zoom, I would welcome you to our home of 35 years to the south of Cambridge. We're going to talk for an hour. I fear Julie may get cross with me if I talk for any longer. I hope we're going to enjoy and share a feast that the Fitzwilliam offers. And first of all, I want to talk about the museum. And then, because I want to give you a picture of the Viscount Fitzwilliam, the 7th Viscount that provoked the museum, I talk a little about portrait painting in comparison with Chinese art. And then, instead of just taking you round the most famous paintings and saying, here's a Titian, here's a Rembrandt, I thought I'd try and show you their paintings, which in my view represent the different roles of the artist. So you'd see some as a servant of the church, and in another case, servant of the church and the state, or someone like Van Dyke working as a propagandist. So that's what I'm hoping to do. Now, the museum itself, museums in the West, I like to think of them as warehouses of captured knowledge and culture for future generations. And the path up to the Fitzwilliam, it was founded in 1817 and beyond, is an interesting one. Let me give you John Ruskin's view of the importance of art and museums. A nation's autobiography is written in the manuscript of deeds, of words, and of art. So you can see a bit of our autobiography within this museum. In modern terms, our Western museum started maybe 1,000 years ago with Christian monasteries, when we emerged from what we unfairly call the Dark Ages into a more stable society. Then there was a second phase, which augmented the monasteries through the Oxford and Cambridge colleges. There were about combined 30 colleges in the Renaissance period, and they were full of generally clever academics who would travel much time away from university, and their libraries and their chapels would end up as a depository for art. And then there's the third phase of private museums. So you have Ashmole founding the Ashmolean, or Sloane giving us the basis for the British Museum. And Fitzwilliam comes at the end of that phase. He was born 1760s, died 1816, and he left his art collection to the university. Okay. So I've been telling you about the development of museums in the West, in England. And the fourth phase, of course, is public museums. I've given you two pictures. It's a classical building, the sort of building you can see in the Parliament House in Vienna, the White House, the Pantheon. It was a very common style, which I think looks magnificent. I should tell you that the art architecture guru Nicholas Pevsner didn't rate the building very highly. Here you have the inside of the hall, and the whole principle behind the museum is to make it seem like it's a museum of a private gentleman. And you would arrive at the ground floor and go up the magnificent staircase, and through this hall that was decorated without much regard to a budget. Architect was E.M. Barry, finished in the 1860s, 70s. He decorated films like clubs in London, like the Reform Club, which you either know or might have seen from around the world in 70 to 80 days or whatever it was. And you can think of Downton Abbey or the TV series, even older, Upstairs, Downstairs. The working people were on the ground floor and you went up to the top floor. This style of interior design is known almost as kind of high Victorian. And I just think it's of interest in as much as at that time, 1870s, we'd lost control of the outside. It was polluted. And this was a reaction to the artist saying, well, yes, but we've still got control inside. So it was an elaborate, extravagant approach to internal decoration. And I grew up near Liverpool, and you can see in the bottom left a picture of again, the classical building, very impressive building, St. George's Hall. And I grew up with it being totally black. That's my memory, being driven past by my mother, even blacker than it looks in that photograph. And now it's clean. So it's attempting, and I think successfully, to give a suggestion of being a private home. And when you come to Cambridge, another small museum, which is lovely, is called Kettle's Yard, a private museum given in the 1950s to the university, 3 cottages knocked together. And you see from the pictures at the bottom, again, a private home being used as a museum. And much of our art was meant to be seen in private, not the religious art, but much of the other art. And I think it's something that Fitzwilliam offers. It's not unique. In the 8th district of Paris, you've got the Jacquemin André, you've got possibly the Rembrandt house as well. That's more of a shrine, possibly. But I think it's nice to see the intimacy, experience the intimacy of the Fitzwilliam. This is his picture, painted by Joseph Wright. Joseph Wright of Derby, whose famous picture, Experiment with an Air Pump, you may, when a bird is killed, to the horror of his daughter watching when the vacuum is created in a jar. And Joseph Wright painted this of Fitzwilliam. He would have been at the university, I think, about to graduate. He's wearing the clothes of what we called a noble fellow commoner. We had, right up to the 1800s and beyond, 6 social grades of scholar, really depending on your money, your social background, which is extraordinary. I think he looks a decent man. I think he's got a touch of the privilege of David Cameron about him, actually. But one other thing, there are very few pictures, paintings of him during his life. And very often people of his background had kind of swagger portraits done, every other year. He didn't, in fact, go to Eton. He was educated at home in Ireland, but then came to Trinity Hall in Cambridge. When he was here, he fell in love with a barmaid, and that romance was forbidden by his family. He was sent off to Paris, where he did the same, fell in love with Anne Bernard. who was also a dancer. And by her, that was a long relationship. He had 2 sons. He wasn't allowed to marry. And as a result, he said he'd never marry. And that is why the wealth and treasures of his collection came to Cambridge University. He died 1816, 1817. The museum was founded in a small street, Free School Lane, and it didn't move to the present premises until the late 1840s. I just wanted to show you something that I enjoy. You see his hand is hidden in the top in the main portrait, and I've exaggerated, blown it up in the middle. Hands, body parts were expensive. There's a wonderful painting in the museum of Rubens' Saviour of the World, and the hands, my picture doesn't do it justice, but are just fabulous. Van Dyke, this is a picture in the museum, I'll show you in a minute, was also famed for his ability to paint hands. So in this case, it stuck inside his waistcoat, possibly as a measure of economy. I'm not sure. I rather like the idea that in China you have a similar phrase. I think this poor man discovered a huge bit of jade and told the emperor, and the emperor didn't believe him and cut his leg off. Another emperor came. He told the same story. He had the other leg cut off. It's perhaps not directly analogous, but it does mean if something costs very much and you don't see the hand. Fitzwilliam. So in portraiture, I want to make a brief comment of the different approach between Asia and ourselves. You see the full front portrait of Fitzwilliam, nothing to distract us other than his face and his clothes. And you see 2 other pictures. On the right, Bertoni, who made his career in Italy through painting the young men who were on their European tour, the milords from England. And it was a rite of passage at one point to have this man, Bertoni, paint your portrait. And it's such a kind of classical painting because you've got a dog to show loyalty, you've got books to show learning, expensive clothes, classical architectural pillars in the background. And similarly on the left, Reynolds, that's the Bradel family. Nature is not so important, is it, in that painting? What you have is the boy to show that the family dynasty will remain, the rather overweight lady, the dog for loyalty, and Mr. Bradel standing there with excessive sureness of his place in society. And this is a different approach to what you have in China, because portrait painting, you see on the right, was really at the bottom of the scale. And what was top in China was landscape, because it showed the essence, the inner life and spirit. And it was the opposite, you see on the left, within the UK or within the West. Landscape was at the bottom. You had John Constable unable to secure his future father-in-law's permission to marry Maria Bicknell because he was only a landscape painter. And top are religious and history paintings, and then portraiture. And you can see it in some of these paintings from Chinese artists. This at the end of the near the end of the Ming and dynasty, and there are people there, but they're not as important as what's captured in nature. And one of my favorite artists, going back to the song Li Bai, I mean, the figures are more important, but it's not a full-on painting, is it, of showing a status of rich clothes, of learning. Very, very different approach. Realism against the idealism in the East. You see these pictures there. moving on, I want to show you the different roles of the artist. You have Simone Martini as the servant of the church, Domenico Veneziano, who is, okay, a servant of the church, but introducing politics. And through other paintings here, propaganda of Van Dyke, and then others showing you life as it really is, Hogarth and Bruegel the younger as well. And special requests from Julie, I've been asked to mention the porcelain and the jade well. One of the most important paintings we have, the early Renaissance, is this picture of Simone Martini. And this is a moment in our art where the influences of Byzantium from the east, the Gothic from the north, classical from the south, are merging within an Italy that is increasingly rich from the success of its city-states and therefore able to finance art. This is a triptych which actually should be a pentateuch, or however you pronounce it, 5 pieces. I think 2 pieces are sadly separated and are in the States. But I wanted to make one point. You see it at our museum in a bright gallery that is well lit, and that's good because you can see the detail. But in its original, like so much early Renaissance art, it would have been in a dark church with a small amount of light coming in through painted stained windows and helped by candles. So it became a far more moving experience, I think. But we can see it well enough. And this is the artist serving the church. And look at these 3 miserable looking saints. On the left, St. Gimignanus from San Gimignano, lovely little town near Florence I visited. And in the center, the figure I'm going to talk about, St. Michael. And he is looking in your eye to tell you that you are not doing good enough, because you do see the balance he's holding in his left hand. Let me blow it up. Can you see that now? I've got the balance there, and there's a figure who is on the right-hand side of the balance, which is a good side, and the bad side is out of the picture. But the bad side outweighs the good. So the message here is this individual in front of St. Michael, who, when he wasn't slaying dragons, determined whether you could get into heaven, was saying, you're not up to scratch, you're not good enough, you've got to go and behave better. So you have these, I think, intriguing messages coming out. You notice there's very little perspective, no detail in the background. The guilt there is not distracting really from those figures. So the artist is trying to, that's the, in the circle there again, is the balance. The artist is trying to promote good behavior. And I love this quote attributed to Petrarch, suggesting that Simone must have been in paradise, studied well and copied what he saw. Lovely, lovely quote. And wanting to now to move on to an artist who was working for the church, certainly, but also started reflecting the politics. And if there was a big potato coming across from an art community in Shanghai or the Beijing 798 art zone, this is the picture the director of the museum would take them to. It's the picture everybody learns about in the history of art. And they're quite often, I've been there with friends who've studied history of art at their university, said, oh, this is where the painting is. And this is seen as a very significant painting. It's part of a sacred conversation with 5 pieces like this at the bottom. This is one of 5, and a big altarpiece above, on the unfashionable north side of the River Arno, in a church there. And it's the Annunciation, but how different to 100 years before. This is mid 1400s, and you can see perspective, the focus on nature, realism. You see the picture on the top left and right, and then look at the perspective, the depth, the path leading to the closed gate, which is a gate to the Hortus Conclusus, the closed garden, symbolizing perhaps the Immaculate Conception with Mary as well. And look at the movement. You can see it, or the realism in Mary's face. So it's, so far, is another religious painting, but I think it's already very different in technique to Simone Martini. There are other messages, 2 black windows either side of the path. Is that suggesting that if you leave the right path, you'll end up in darkness? But this human feeling, what I like, it's different to what you had before. And here's the politics within this. I'm showing you the path leading towards the enclosed garden at the end, and above the top, where I put the red star, you can see the crenellations, or the merlons, a technical word, is not a great use, architectural term. And you see they're not shaped normally. And what's interesting to me is that at this time, a large part of Central Europe was split between the Guelphs and the Ghibelline, and one supported the Pope and the other the Holy Roman Emperor. And Florence actually was a Ghibelline city, but this artist's, Veneziano's patron, was a Guelph. So he's actually put in the crenellations of his patron, which was a very political gesture. It probably didn't go down too well in Florence at the time. And I was looking up recently and stumbled on the house of Juliet at Verona, and her family were Guelphs, Capulets, and they've got these same crenellations there, which, you know, I just find very enjoyable. But politicians. Now, a Titian, this was a gift to the museum in 1917. What a gift, which was their centenary, their first centenary as a museum. And this is Titian, and he's painting here a historical painting that has nothing to do with religion. And this is quite a change in partly in his art, but also the art of others. And he's showing that also painting has the ability to compete with other forms of artistic communication, writing, music, in particular, poetry. And I'll show you that again with a painting by Géricault, the French artist, in the early 1800s. So here we have this historical painting that is repeating a scene from Livy, where the Roman monarchy is about to fall in 500 BC with a led, and the rebellion was led by a Brutus that was related to the Brutus that stabbed Caesar sometime later. And Lucretia is about to be raped by this evil man, Tarquin, son of King Tarquin. Some say typically that it was her fault, but what chance did she have? Look at the sturdy naked knee between her thighs. She didn't have a chance. And you see there, you see as well the line between the dagger and the eyes of Lucretia and this evil man. And the painting is divided into almost two halves, two segments. The weak woman with the painted pastel colours, and the fierce colours, the red symbolizing a pulsing blood perhaps, on the top left. And one of the messages also was that in this period of humanism, which was painted in the late 1500s, showing that we can make good or bad of our lives. We're no longer kind of have this Calvinistic approach or Catholic approach, where it was all preordained. This is a privileged man who's chosen to do badly. Titian did a number of paintings based on Ovid's poetry as well. He called them poésie, this competition with other form of art. Painting can compete, and it obviously can, can't it? Van Dyke now, moving on, well, slightly on. We've gone from late 1500s to mid 1600s, perhaps. Another picture you can enjoy. Archbishop Laud, one of the two people, along with the Earl of Wentworth, who the weak Charles I let be executed before he himself was executed. He was politician, also a chancellor of Oxford University, where he was quite a success. He increased the numbers, expanded the curriculum. Then he went on to be head of the English Church unsuccessfully, and ended up being executed. You can just see in the picture in the top right what originally would have been quite a coloured bit of painting by Van Dyke, because one of Laud's ambitions was to reintroduce the beauty into holiness. The dull, boring certainty of the Puritans, of Protestants. This was a counter-Reformation attempt, and this is what was so unsuccessful. This is really when I start talking about propaganda. He did a number of paintings of this man, Laud. I think it's over a dozen. He did over 40 of the King Charles. And this man was actually very small and slightly built. But you see here that we're looking up to him, and his body is bulked out with clothes that give him broad shoulders and a big chest. It just wasn't the case. So I tend to think it's fantastic art, but it's untrue. I prefer the artists who were true. Van Dyke had been a pupil of Rubens and had come across to work and be well paid in consequence to the royal court of the Stuarts before the revolution that Oliver Cromwell led. He was famous, Lord, for Van Dyke, for the quality of his hands. I showed you the picture on the bottom right before. And I've read comments about this painting suggesting that the hands show the venality, the corruption of Archbishop Laud. I don't see venality in those hands. I see elegance, and I see a brilliant painter. So we've moved, I think, away from, say, Domenico Veneziano, mostly doing the service of Christianity, painting in the service of Christianity. Then you've got Titian, who is using a secular subject to show the power of painting. And now to an artist who is really working for the state as a propagandist. And it's interesting, this idea of bulking up a small man was adopted by Augustus John in must be around the time, early 1900s, time of the First World War, when he painted this picture of Thomas Hardy, who again was a small man, but he's put him in a big kind of winter jacket and made him look big. So he's not the first or the last artist there. And you see these other pictures of Van Dyke, over 40, despite the fact that King Charles was low in stature and little in bulk. So, you know, you shove him on a horse. Dishonest, even if brilliant. Majestic. Now, an artist which I think is really fun is Peter Bruegel, the younger. There was this dynasty of Bruegels in the late 1500s for 100 years. And the elder one, you remember, painted scenes of peasant weddings that looked terrific. You wanted to be there. You'd be sure to have a good time. And then this was the son, Peter Bruegel, the younger, shared the same Christian name. And he was known as Herr Bruegel because he usually painted scenes that expressed the distress of society in the Netherlands in the 1600s. And that is notwithstanding that he was also a very talented flower painter as well. The Netherlands was brutally occupied by the Spanish. There was this infamous Duke of Alba. The figures as to the numbers of people who were killed varied depending on whether you're Spanish or Dutch, but they were large. And this figure painting here, it's in spring, you can see from the tree. It's called the Feast of St. Anthony and St. Hubert. Hubert was the saint of hunting, because at the end in early spring, before the harvest, the food's run out, you need to hunt. And they are having a party. And this is what is interesting. First of all, there's no dominant focal point because life was chaotic. You didn't have a rich man like the Earl of Northampton, painted by Pompeo, standing there in all his glory. So where do you look? It's a bit like Where's Wally, isn't it? You know, I remember with the children, you'd look, you know, every new look is rewarded with a little secret coming out of the painting. And let me share some with you. On the top right, you've got a church. In it, you've got someone taking mass, but the Catholic Church said nobody could start the celebrations of the feast until everybody had been into mass. Well, the party, I'll show you, had been going on for hours, so they're breaking the law. And similarly, you have what we in England used to call a hedge printer, a preacher outside beneath a tree, and that's where there are more people. That is the non-established religion. And you've even got a man I'm showing there urinating against the church. Well, these are pretty obvious little comments against the church. And you've got bottom right and bottom left. You know, these are people who have been at the party for some time. And on the top left, you have a typical resume of a medieval masque where the owner of the inn has to go traveling. He leaves his wife behind. And can you see in the barrel on the top left of that top left painting, he returns unexpectedly and his head sticking out of the barrel, and he catches his wife misbehaving. And who is she misbehaving with? A priest. So you've got all these digs there. And on the right, you have this thin-looking springtime soup. And it's when they would have used the corrupted wheat at that time of year. And that has the same effect, I'm told, as LSD. And you lose your head. It's ergot in chemical terms, I understand. And I told you it was the Feast of St. Hubert and St. Anthony. And St. Anthony is the patron saint in the West of lost minds, of depression, or if you're as old as me, of lost property. At British railway stations, they used to hand in your umbrella there. But you see, this is it's art which to me has so much more interest, not just from the skill, but from telling the stories of our history. And either side of this painting I've just shown you by Peter Bruegel the Younger, of these two paintings, which I just think are lovely, and wanted to share them with you. There are not many paintings I'd want to take home from the Fitzwilliam and live with. These are quite small, and they would fit very nicely either side of the fireplace beneath. I just behind me. I think they're gorgeous. You know, an intelligent, educated, rich young lady who, dare I say, is gorgeous to boot. Lovely. If you see Bruegel, as he certainly was, as a protester artist, very opposite to Van Dyke, again, it just reminded me, and I know I'm in the company of Julie, who'll know, 10,000 times more than I do, but artists have this role as protesters. And at the end of the Ming, beginning of the Qing dynasty, there were artists who wouldn't accept the new regime, and their paintings, and I think they were known as leftover subjects, it would be trees on their own to indicate unhappiness. And it's about the same time as Bruegel. And I think it's this artist reacting to events around them that are unhappy is very interesting. And stress and unhappiness can be a great creative motivator, and we see this time and time again. Frans Hals, rather a nice painting. You may know at the Wallace collection in London, bottom left, the Laughing Cavalier, quite different to this one. I think it's so sad. He died in middle 1600s, 1666, I think, and he died in poverty, kind of like Rembrandt. I think it's the world gone mad, isn't it, when you consider what his paintings are worth now. And this is a painting is almost, to me, impressionistic, a very limited palette, only 4 colours within it, almost quickly done, leaning back in a chair, which is quite a common aspect of House's painting. And when it was acquired, I think in the late 1800s by the museum, the hat had been painted out. Interesting, isn't it? Because it made him look a bit kind of louche, a bit untrustworthy. And indeed, I wouldn't have welcomed him as an escort to one of our daughters, I'm sure. But the interesting thing about the hat is it's one of the most important things of the painting, because it reflected the trade that the West had with Canada. It's a beaver hat. Beaver makes the best fur. When it rains, apparently the rim of the hat doesn't collapse. And it's an important thing. And this was the origin, of course, of England's interest in Canada. It wasn't crazy imperialistics. It was imperialist. It was trade. But to paint it out tells you something, doesn't it, of the people who would have done that. I want to talk about Hogarth. Again, this is honest art. His father, the 3 pictures, we have 4 pictures of Hogarth. Hogarth's father, Richard, had run a coffee shop in London, central London, Clerkenwell, which wasn't very successful. Our coffee houses were referred to as penny universities, because for a penny, you'd get your drink and you could read a newspaper and educate yourself. And some, of course, went on, like Lloyd's, who specialised in insurance, or another coffee shop, Jonathan, specialised in the trading of stocks, became the stock exchange. Hogarth Senior decided to specialize in classical culture, and you could only attend if you spoke Latin or Greek within the coffee house. Doesn't sound too great a business idea, and indeed he went bust. So Hogarth had a difficult upbringing, and he painted these three pictures. I put them at the top and there. And again, there's like a realism. There's none of this Van Dyke building up, is there? On the right, Mr. Arnold, a northern businessman, getting a bit of a double chin after a successful business life. And you can see his daughter on the left, on the way to becoming a lady. It's showing you the social movement that was possible within our society. And the man at the bottom, a cheeky lawyer, James. Sadly, we know nothing about him after this portrait. He disapproved, he disappeared. But you can really sense that these are the people painted that were existing and living around him. And look at these other ones. These aren't in the Fitzwilliam, but the Shrimp Girl, again, it's a little impressionistic, isn't it? And he was showing the corruption of rich society, marriage a la mode, or the rake's progress. What we do have, which is a lovely, very small painting called Corrupted Justice. He's giving a society as he knows it. And you have these three judges there, two are asleep, one of them's playing on his iPhone, and there's a figure of death behind. It's hopeless. Another phrase I like to try and share with my Chinese students, different expressions that they can use, is to laugh your head off, because he painted the Lord Lovett, who was who rebelled in 1745 rebellion against the Hanoverians, the Stuarts, and he was eventually captured, a very unattractive man, and he was executed, the last man in England to be executed with an axe, apparently. And Hogarth went to visit him in St Albans on the way south and took a drawing of him. And then by the time he came to be executed on the left, you have he had his assistants with a lithographic print of his painting. Quite interesting commercial touch. And 2 days or so before the execution, people were queuing to watch it and see how the scaffold was being built, and it collapsed and a lot of people died. And he thought this very funny. He could see it from his prison cell in the Tower, and hence we have to laugh your head off. So he's showing society as he sees it. And Hogarth ended as a successful painter, and you see his staff on the right. And again, they look people that you could write a paragraph about, aren't they? Jericho, look at the poetry at the bottom. Victor Hugo wrote it, calling it the expiation. It snowed. Someone was defeated by his conquering. For the first time, the eagle lowered its head. Heavy days. The emperor came back slowly, letting Moscow in smoke burn behind him. Terrific, terrific imagery there, isn't it? And the someone is Napoleon, who was a tyrant, despite what modern French people might say about him. His decision to invade Russia cost 500,000 lives. Now, this is a man, I think, who was competing, like Titian, with other art forms, because other people tried to do it. You have the 1812 overture. You have Tolstoy, War and Peace. You have Victor Hugo writing about it. And this is the picture, or slightly bigger like this. And look at it, it's a truck carrying too many people, and it's rolling towards the dark clouds, isn't it, in the distance? You've got the analogy of blood in the little parts of red. And the Imperial Guard, who had the red feather in their cap, you can see at the back, he too. And is the man they're carrying being lifted off because he's dead or not? But it tells you a whole story, doesn't it? I think it's competing with others and very successfully. And those are the some of the portions of the painting lit up. The dead or alive soldier at the bottom, and no other faces are seen. I'm actually rereading a book at the moment on the 1812 invasion, and it's just horrific. It's a book that is told through people's memories that have been recorded at the time. And you see there and there as well. But it's competing with other art forms. That's what I like. I've read you that. Hardy, Thomas Hardy, I forgot to mention, part of the Dynas as well. So you have the artist as working for the church, for politicians like Van Dyke, for on their own reflecting humanism and new philosophy like Titian, and this man as well. There, both, you see those two examples. And bottom left as well, you've got Hogarth showing the society as it is. I wanted to just mention the flowers at the gallery. There's a renowned flower gallery, most of which were given in the late 1800s. And flower gardening in China is obviously, or flower painting is very symbolic. And you have really different role models, don't you, in China? But our flower painting was more about encouraging you almost to behave better, almost going back to Simone Martini. It became a style of painting from the Renaissance onwards. You've got Primavera with Botticelli. I wanted to quote you, but I've forgotten the number of flowers on Primavera. Absolutely extraordinary that people count all these varieties of flowers. And this reflected a search for knowledge, opportunity to display the skills. It reflected trade out to the Far East, people coming home. And many of our plants that we think are English come from your country in China, from Wisteria sinensis onwards. And we also had cold winters. So plants, flowers would cheer you up. And one here is a famous early 1500 painter, George Flagle. But do you notice the main picture is in the middle, and you look at the top left, the urn in which the flowers stand has got a memento mori, just a skull and crossbones. Wonderful quote at the top that we shouldn't dwell on, or perhaps we should. Life is short, pleasure is futile, and death is certain. It's a very different symbolism of flowers in China. And those flowers you see there would never have been in flower at the same time. So you can imagine it took quite a long time for them to complete a painting like this. They would have to come back. And you see the other memories of death, the snails, the money that you can't take with you. And it's as if we could paint something beautiful, but we also had to be reminded of more serious things. We couldn't just have a simple painting for its own sake. Messages of death, bugs in the flowers. And this is Bruegel. And it's interesting, the vase in this case is empty. I mean, it's plain, it's not decorated, hasn't got a skull on. I just wonder whether that's to show that the head of the average man is empty and has nothing in it, or perhaps it can be filled with good things if it's looked after. Some porcelain. We have a selection, a very good 18th century, 1700 selection. And I just put this one first because it's Meissen. There are two Meissens, and in the middle is a Chelsea plate. And the Chelsea porcelain plate is not of such high quality as the Meissen. That's the first point. And the second point is you notice that we are displaying a Chinese scene. This is really at the beginning of the mass of the large importation of porcelain. And I always think it's a bit like Henry Ford on the left. His first machines to drive were similar to the cart and horse on the right. You had to make a connection in the potential customer's mind. So we copied your stories. And this is the famous one of the young man who became a Song dynasty minister. He saved a friend's life by breaking the porcelain vase. I think it's a well-known story to all Chinese people. And we had an obsession with porcelain in the West. If you wanted a terrific book, a small paperback, I've written here, Judy Gleason, The Arcanum, The Secret. And the secret of how to make porcelain was, sought over as if it was a license to print gold, which it almost was. And the Germans were the best at it, and the French came later. And I liked also the fact that the Chinese exports had to have different colours. You had stronger colours with scenes of dragons fiercely fighting, and we wanted flowers and pastel colours. I think, shows you the difference in our cultures, because the one could not understand the other. There were comments like, well, what sort of civilization wants dragons on its teapot? And similarly, China, and I put the phrase at the bottom, I think it means foreign food, foreign colours, specifically made for the porcelain. I'm not sure it doesn't double up as a foreign food, meaning equally kind of rubbish food that we ate in this country. Many examples here. I just wanted to show you two extracts from the Catherine the Great. You see the dinner plate service, 800 of them. And the plate on the left has got an E, that's the Russian way of spelling Catherine, who was German. And look at 37 artists employed to paint, and 4 on one plate. And it was a unique blue. It was a blue that could only be achieved with a soft porcelain rather than a hard porcelain. And the disadvantage of that is they didn't last so well. If you had a tough bit of steak, downtown St. Petersburg, you would risk scratching the substrate colour. How we ended up with a few pieces here, I'm not so sure. There was a fire in the Royal Palace in Russia, and some were stolen. I'm not sure, perhaps I shouldn't push that. With our jade collection, Julie again asked us to mention, the piece that stood out above all was in the centre bottom. And it was stolen about 10 years ago, along with some other pieces. Actually, with those pieces, I think I show. I have mixed views on that, because we actually took it, the Western people, French, English, I'm not sure, from the Winter Palace in Beijing at the time of the Boxer Rising. So we didn't have a right to it. I was once, because the problem is that it now goes back illegally to China and it won't be seen. At least it was being seen here. But I still can't help feeling that it's, it shouldn't have been in the Fitzwilliam. The danger of returning all these pieces is the whole of the art world would unravel. So I'm not sure where I stand, but I think there's some justification there. I once, in pre-COVID times, gave a lecture at Tsinghua, this massive lecture hall there, and I was talking about the Shang Dynasty bones at the Cambridge Library, kind of 800 of them or something. And this girl stood up saying, "Why have you got them? They should be in China." And I think the answer is that these were purchased. Okay, they were purchased from farmers who perhaps didn't know their value, but we have kept them, and they probably wouldn't have been kept if they'd been left in the ground in China. And they are on display. And I think that is the argument. And they're on display. So in this case, Chinese culture is understood a little elsewhere. So, art should be exchanged. And anyway, it follows the money, doesn't it? We do have this piece left, a boulder, and it shows you the move from ritual to decorative art, doesn't it? As well, you see the intricate carving, and it must have been so difficult with jade being such a hard stone. Connection with China that Fitzwilliam had about a year ago, I think, the most fantastic exhibition on the Han Dynasty. And we had two jade suits, imperial suits. This one here actually is at the museum in Guangzhou, where I've been lucky enough to visit twice. Fantastic. It was found in the burial mound was found when they were digging for a car park for a hotel. And the movement captured with the dancing lady, the musician on the right, just fantastic. And another point, in that exhibition, this bowl was found in possession of the king of Chu in 2,000 years ago, and scholars have proved that its design, its manufacture, shows that it came from way outside China's boundaries, most likely beyond Persia and Northwest. And it just shows you that our culture is not developed in isolation to other cultures. It's something that's shared. A little bit nearing the end on pre-Raphaelites. We have quite a lot of pre-Raphaelite art, same time more or less as the Impressionists. And it's interesting, I think, that I like both, but if you had to choose, there'd be few who wouldn't choose Impressionist art. And it's interesting that this was a time when England was at the top of its game. We were rich, and our artists could only look back at art, style, and form before Raphael. And the Impressionists, from a France that had been humiliated twice by Germany, that had had a brutal communist occupation of Paris, yet they could produce this new style of art. Insecurity as the major creative force is an interesting theme. Do they thrive in hard times? I mean, not exclusively, because you have periods of Western art, of the Dutch Golden Age, the Danish Golden Age, and they were all doing very well. But suffering and insecurity is an important thing, isn't it? And we have these paintings, the pre-Raphaelites. There are really often showing the loss of skills, corruption, greed of the Industrial Revolution. The most famous picture, The Last of England. There are two of them. The original one actually is in Birmingham, and Ford Madox Brown, the artist, did another one here. And you can see it's one of the top 10 pictures in England. I don't really understand why that is. They're sailing to Australia. I mean, look at those figures. 350,000 left for Australia, 160,000 involuntary sent as convicts. And you can see the ugly man at the bottom shaking his fist back at the England he's leaving. Australia's future, the little girl there, and also the baby held. It's again religious overtones, isn't it? And the cabbages to help you get through the voyage, which was an awful voyage, 50 days if you were lucky. Then you got the Impressionist collection. It's a very good one. This is one of my favorite pictures. I take this one home too. It was named after his death, after Degas' death at Au Café. And you got two ladies talking. And as you ladies do so well, you emphasize with each other, you listening. Look at the woman on our right, how she's listening to the other woman who's got a problem, complaining about her husband perhaps, but actually we don't know who they are. Are they milliners making a hat? You've got a bit of colour on the table. Are there two husbands out of view? Are they ladies of the night? You don't know, but it's such a powerful compliment, I think, to the feminine ability to emphasize it. But he was criticized, Degas, as a male chauvinist. He was anti-Jewish at the time of the Dreyfus case as well. And he'd probably be no platformed in modern woke language if people knew about it. But he got something right, didn't he? Could you look at the top right? Another painting, actually at the National Gallery, Au Café Chateaudun. And you've got the male version of feminine empathy there. One man is blind and the other man is reading him the newspaper. Now that's fine. I can do something practical, like read my chum a newspaper, but don't ask me to listen too much to their problems or whatever. And I think that shows a good understanding. You've got another picture here, Au Place Clichy of Renoir, typical Impressionist outside for a moment, affluent central Paris. They're all well dressed. Look at their top hats, the clean street, ridiculously clean, the golden carriage in the background. And Renoir uses her, the front woman there, as a means of separating us from the picture. Degas invited us in to sit at that other painting, didn't he? And she's cutting us off, I think. We have apples. They were an obsession, and potatoes of the Impressionists. Cézanne's, this is a Renoir one, but the Cézanne's famous comment, with an apple I shall astonish Paris. I mean, creating different perspectives. Monet, you know about Rouen Cathedral and the haystacks. Probably less well known are the trees of Epernay. He did 32 copies, and we have one here at the Fitzwilliam. And this was the interesting thing, wasn't it? That he was, this was a new idea for art. It wasn't just their talent. It was the art dealer, this man, Durand Ruel, who thought that artists could have single exhibitions. I mean, it was just revolutionary. If you had the Grand Paris exhibition, it was of every art. You had the National Gallery exhibition at the RA, it's lots of artists. It was a revolutionary idea that this great man had to focus on one artist. And then the even more astonishing idea he had was, we'll have one artist and one theme of haystacks or whatever, so they could show the impact of light. 15 haystacks, 26 Rouen Cathedral, 32 poplar trees. Extraordinary. And the collection of Impressionist art is very impressive. Another one here, Renoir, his son and stepdaughter, who went on to marry a spring day, idle, isn't it? You see there's no mobile phone to disturb you, just chatting. Looks lovely. Some more of Monet. It's a very, very impressive collection. And Cézanne, another one I might take with me. Just a few strokes of the pen, of the brush, creating a kind of clearing in the forest. Lovely. And some details from it. You can see it's very, very simply done. Pizarro painting there. You can't see it that well. The quote from Cézanne, you know, saying Pizarro was a father for me, a man to consult. He wasn't interested in making and storing money. He painted from a shed in his garden, and you see it here slightly, perhaps not to see the detail. The colours aren't quite produced correctly. It shows you the depth. And then the others, I think this is the one to me that says so much. So what I've tried to show you now, just in conclusion, the artist Simone Martini, totally bound up with delivering the church's message. Domenico Veneziano also, but he was prepared to give a bit to his patron who was paying for it. And then you have others, from Titian to Jericho, to who are trying to compete. And then you have the propagandists, Van Dyke, who are in the opposite corner to Hogarth and Bruegel, who are telling life as it is. And we must take, you know, our own opinion as to what we like. It's interesting, and I finished with a bit of Jade and Impressionist and Porcelain. I hope you've had a feast. Tried to share with you here. I hope I've delivered what I promised. Do make contact with me if you come to Cambridge. I'd be delighted. I hope I haven't spoken too long, possibly, but we started late, Julie. And I just hope you saw most of my screen without whatever it was that interfered. I'm happy to take pictures. The sun's shining outside, but I'm happy to stay with you taking pictures.
Well, thank you so much, Nick. I could sit here and listen to you for another hour. You've really taken us onto a real journey through the museum, not only highlighting the important pieces in the Fitzwilliam Museum, but its connection to the other paintings and sculptures and objects from different parts of other museums as well as the world.